introduce our presenter.
Hey, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another wonderful MRC evening program. Hopefully, you guys will have the opportunity to learn something, maybe something new, maybe something you hadn't thought about before, or maybe this will be a good reminder. But it is my great pleasure to welcome you not only to this training, but also to present or introduce our presenter today, which is David Woods, who's the Chesterfield Health District Local Health Emergency Coordinator. And prior to that, he was an MRC unit coordinator, also for the Chesterfield Health District. And without further ado, here is David Woods.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome, and thanks for joining us tonight for this training. It is an honor to be able to present this personal preparedness information to you this evening, and I do trust that you'll have an abundance of questions. I'm certainly not going to be able to share everything that would be of help in a disaster, and you're going to have some questions to make this discussion lively. But I do have some information to go through as we proceed this evening. And by way of introduction, Mike did share that I'm the local health emergency coordinator here in the Chesterfield Health District, at least for a little while longer. And my background is in emergency preparedness in the military, and I've had the experience of working in hurricane situations, in wildfire situations, in aircraft incidents, and so on. And so that was, a good introduction to it. But then coming into this position, we've dealt with tornadoes throughout the Commonwealth. We've dealt with flooding, and of course, the ever-present situation of hurricanes. And so all of that comes together to make sure that we cover a gamut of ways that you'll need to prepare for what could come your way. So let me ask, just as a rhetorical question, I'm going to ask you to think back to your own experiences, like I've cited wildfires and so on. Have you ever participated in the response to some sort of disaster, whether it was a tornado response or a flood or even preparing for a hurricane? Those kind of situations, they come along, and sometimes we have a little bit of warning, and usually we do not. And consequently, many people are caught unprepared. So as you think about the incidents that you've gone through, I would ask you to contemplate, were you prepared for it? Were you ready? And did you have all the resources you needed to make sure that the best response was at your disposal, so that you could, protect yourself, your family, your loved ones, and your belongings? So, with that thought in mind, as we go through this, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and bring up our slides that we'll use tonight. And go back to our introductory slide there. And so as you can see from this image, there are a myriad of things that can come our way here in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And so the question I want you to ask yourself is, how were you prepared in your past? And are you willing to be prepared in the future? Are you ready? Would you be prepared if something like this would come your way today? So our approach tonight will be to go over these three primary areas about building a kit to prepare for emergencies, making a plan, and then being informed of how to stay ahead of the news and stay ahead of the information that you'll need to adequately prepare. So we're going to talk about these things to make sure that you're prepared. The very first thing is you need to be aware. And so that suggests then that you have to monitor the information that's coming in, whether it's the news on a television, or on an emergency radio, or on a news feed on a mobile device, those kinds of things, to stay aware of what might be coming your way. And in all of that, to be mindful of where you are, what's happening, what's approaching, because there's some ways that you can prepare, and you want to make sure that you do that as things are gathering up a threat, such as a hurricane forecast that's coming your way, or the possibility of tornadoes that would spin off of a bad storm. So as you go into the process of monitoring things, you also want to keep your loved ones informed, not just yourself. You want to share the information with as many people as possible. That way, the folks can take action as well to prepare themselves. And as you prepare, there are things that you will want to make sure to have handy. We're going to look at a couple things that are threats to us. And if I can get my slides moving here again, excuse me. All right. Well, excuse me. Let me pause this because I've got a device on the screen that's not allowing me to advance the slides. One moment. All right. Are we seeing that again?
Yes, we are. Thank you.
All right, my apologies. I don't know what happened to the screen. But in any case, some of the disasters that we can see that come our way, you just went through in this past summer, Hurricane Ian in Florida and its aftermath as it came up the coast. Those are obvious threats to us here in the Commonwealth, not just on the coast and the immediate area adjacent to the waterways, but also in several of these recent hurricanes, we've seen extensive flooding in the far southwest part of the state as the spin-off of the heavy rains affects those areas. And with the rivers running through that part of the state, a lot of flooding that's come that way. As a matter of fact, here's a picture of flooding in eastern Kentucky this year that was not necessarily associated with that hurricane, but was with similar heavy storms. And this can occur in the Commonwealth of Virginia as well. Likewise, one of the emergencies that we have to be prepared for, unfortunately, is terrorism. And the Commonwealth of Virginia was a victim of this in 9/11 when that plane struck the Pentagon. These are circumstances that we can't prepare for, unlike the hurricanes that we do have some advance warning. So as we go through this, again, I want to ask yourself, would you be prepared? Would you be willing to take the action necessary when someone tells you that there's a threat? For instance, if someone would come to your door and knock on your door and say you have 5 minutes to evacuate your home, would you be willing to follow those instructions in order to save yourself, your family, and whatever belongings you could? Those are questions that are hard to answer in the midst of the stress, and so you need to think about it in advance. What would I do? Would I be prepared to evacuate if given that instruction? Some of the folks that live on the coast, they oftentimes choose to ride out a storm, and consequently they don't evacuate, and that can put themselves and their families in a greater jeopardy if they don't follow the instructions. So just keep that in mind. One of the other things that we faced recently was Interstate 95 was shut down for a day due to accidents related to heavy snowfall and slick roads. I don't know if any of you were unfortunate enough to be caught in that, but it was a terrible experience for so many that it actually caused a congressional investigation as to what was going on with that, and the need to respond more proactively for the inclement weather by preparing roads and so on. But the folks in the actual road shutdown, they also had lessons learned from this, such as when they set out on the road in a inclement condition, do they have an emergency kit with them, extra food, water, clothing, etc., and enough supplies to last throughout that disaster. And on that note, then, in addition to being informed of the circumstances that are going on around you, you need to be able to respond to a disaster or to be prepared for a disaster by having an emergency kit. In our health district, one of our practices is to make sure that all of our staff members are equipped with a kit for responding to an emergency. Now, it's not completely outfitted like this, but it does have some important items in it, flashlights and first aid kits and so on, batteries and a hand cranked radio. These are easy to come by in the local stores, and every family should at least have these things set aside in the event of an emergency. In my family, we have one for each vehicle and one for our home. And so it's not unheard of to have several emergency kits at the ready in case of something arising. The guidance there about 1 gallon per person per day of water for at least 3 days is a crucial element in an emergency kit. The human body can go several days or weeks without food, but not very long at all without water. And so when it comes time to prepare for, or when it comes down to an emergency happening, you don't want to be setting aside the water at that point. You want it set aside in advance. And you want to rotate that water out. Don't keep it on hand in storage for, say, more than 6 to 8 months. You want to rotate it out and put fresh water in storage for the event of an emergency. And again, if you are able to do so, to put some supplies of non-perishable food in those kits as well. In addition to those basics, these are some things that are highly recommended for an emergency kit. A whistle to help get people's attention in case that you are not able to call out or to wave somebody down. The ability to follow the sound of a whistle is a great way to get help. A can opener for food. How many times do we think about non-perishable food and store it away, but then don't actually put a can opener in there to open it up? Nowadays, there are many, many more food containers with the pop top, flip top type of things that make it easier to open, but there are those that you want to, or there are those items that you want to make sure to have a can opener for. In addition, something that we used to recommend was a dust mask to help filter contaminated air, but over the last couple of years, we have gotten used to face masks and N95 masks, and these are much more readily available to the general public, and we're familiar with them, and they are a great way to keep yourself a little bit safer in the event of a situation with a contaminant in the air. And on that same note, using plastic to seal up windows and doors in the event of sheltering in place is a great way to keep out something. If there was an incident, say with a hazmat spill, a truck or a train wreck that would cause a hazardous cloud to be in your community, using these kinds of methods would help seal up that home and keep you protected. Some of us take medications for various illnesses and various conditions, and so having extra medications on hand is an important element that you want to keep in your supplies of emergency preparedness tools. And speaking of tools, a small toolkit, those multi-pliers that have screwdrivers, knives, scissors, and so on are great to have in your kit to prepare for the possibility that you might need to cut your self out of a situation with some wires that are, snagged something and have tripped up the situation of being able to evacuate. Also, wrenches for turning off utilities and those kind of things, pliers that will be used in that event as well. Never a bad idea to have a small toolkit on hand. Something that's maybe a little less commonly used or kept in an emergency kit is important family documents or copies of important family documents. We just don't think of them. And you start to ask the question, okay, what is an important family document? And so you might think of birth certificates, marriage certificates, passports, those kinds of things that you would want to keep a copy of in the event that you would need to evacuate your home. In addition to having a kit to prepare for a emergency, you want to have a plan as well. And the circumstances cannot be predicted at all. And so you have to have a plan that is somewhat multifaceted. Before an emergency happens, you need to sit down with family members and decide how you will get in contact with each other. Where you'll go in the event of an emergency, if you have to leave home or if you are away from home when the emergency happens. And naturally, you want to keep a copy of this emergency plan in your emergency kit so that you can refer to it and act according to instructions that you put in it. The family may not be together when a disaster strikes, so you have to kind of go through in your mind and in your plan and answer the questions how you'll get to a safe place, how you'll get in contact with one another, how you'll get reunited, and just run through scenarios of what you would do in different situations. Some, for instance, the weather is very, very cold, like the stranded families and individuals on I-95 in that snowstorm. A vastly different situation than a condition like a hurricane that's coming through and dumping a lot of water and creating high wind threats. You need to run through different scenarios with your family members and go through what you would do in the various events that arise. And not just the folks that you would think of perhaps as members of your own immediate family. You might be thinking of some friends, neighbors, or older family members that might need some special assistance in these kind of circumstances. And so you need to enhance your plan of what to do in this kind of circumstance. If you know someone that needs special assistance, you're going to need to include that in your plan and what kind of conditions that they might have, whether they need special medical equipment and extra medications that they would need to have on hand. And as you go through this, exercise of thinking through those scenarios, you want to think of folks that can come alongside to help. Maybe it's extended family members, neighbors that can help during an emergency, and make sure that you share your disaster plan with them. And even go to the point as you go through your planning and not just talk through it, but practice it. Do some scenarios and make it an event out of it to say today we're going to practice our evacuation plan, or we're going to be at various parts in the city. We're going to pretend today that there was some sort of a incident that caused us to not be able to get home, and we're going to practice what we would do to rendezvous and come out in the good out of this disaster. There are a lot of folks that receive treatment such as dialysis and other kind of medical support that are served by a hospital or clinic, and they are dependent upon these services no matter what the conditions are. And so you need to research, coordinate with those facilities and find out what they do in the event of emergencies and how their services can be, or how your loved one or you can get the services or find a backup provider in the event that they're not able to meet the needs. And make sure that the folks are aware of what the needs are. If you have a communication related disability, just you've got to be able to identify and share how the best way to communicate with you. A number of years ago here in the greater Richmond area, an audiologist developed a system for sharing disaster preparedness resources with the deaf and hearing impaired. And they gave out cards and different kind of tools that those folks so afflicted could make it quickly known to others who might be helping them or trying to help them in a disaster of their hearing loss. If you have someone you know that's in that same kind of condition or vision impaired, that you need to help get that information to those that might be providing care. And so something in your emergency kit that would assist in that is a very important tool. The number of folks receiving support and assistance, including pensions and Social Security payments and so on, are increasing as our population ages. And so being dependent upon the mail is for those services for checks and payments is not reliable in the event of an emergency. And so there are ways to make sure that they can continue to receive payments and support in the event of an emergency or disaster. And there on the screen is an 800 number you can use. And we will be sharing these slides, and the link there on the screen will also be available to you if you need to pass that on to someone. Not only our immediate family members and our friends and neighbors need assistance in the event of an emergency, our pets are also vital to us. Many of us consider our pets members of the family, and we want to make sure that they ride out a storm easily as well, or without too much harm to them. And so recognizing that that's the case, you want to include your pets in your emergency plan. This particular photo shows a rather detailed tag for this dog. I don't know that we have the ability to do something quite that detailed and specific, but you want to make sure that the dog, that the pets have, there we go, that the pets have a identification tag that is current, that has good contact information on it. And also it's now fairly common to have a microchip in a pet to help locate it in case there is separation. And naturally you want to keep records, photos, and so on of your pet. Adrini, I'm not sure, someone is advancing the slides that I'm not. So well, we'll go to this one now, but just to make folks aware, to not advance the slides, please. So just as we need an emergency kit for our family members, so too we need to include items for our pets in our emergency kits. Pardon me. And that includes food and water for them as well, any medications. And I told you before that a gallon of water per person per day for a minimum of 3 days is what's appropriate for for yourself or for a family member to have in the event of an emergency. Most of us will not know how much water to take for a pet, and it isn't a gallon per day, but rather this simple rule of thumb: 1 ounce per pound of the pet per day. So if you have an 8-pound dog, they need a cup of water a day. If it's a a 60-pound dog, then it's going to need substantially more. So just keep that in mind. 1 ounce per pound per pet per day. And of course, just like your vital records, your important papers you want to keep those for your pets as well. And it's really important to keep in mind that there's a lot of shelters that aren't able to take pets, and so you need to pre-plan this and think where and how you're going to evacuate if you need to with your pets. And of course, if the situation isn't safe for you, then you don't want to leave your pet behind, and you don't know how long you'll be gone. So, if it's possible, take them with you, but make sure that you are aware of where a pet would be welcomed as you evacuate. This can be discerned by looking here. Local emergency management offices, animal shelters, and so on can tell you where the pet shelters are available. Many more, and I think perhaps Mike can help us from his experience, many more of our area shelters do have arrangements with veterinary services and animal control services to help shelter pets. As you consider your pets in a shelter-in-place environment, you want to make sure that they don't get off and not be able to be found. Particularly, again, cats are often prone to doing this, hiding in small enclosed spaces, and that could be very dangerous to them in the event of a disaster. And so as you shelter in place, you want to make sure to close off those areas and kind of try to keep your pets nearby, perhaps in a safe room in your home, perhaps even going to the extent of keeping them in a pet carrier in your home until it's a safer condition. All right, so those are preparation things about the getting ready for a disaster, having an emergency kit, staying informed with news and websites and radio updates of what's going on. But now when a disaster actually strikes, let's take a look at some approaches to how to best survive, how to best come out of it without harm. The idea of sheltering in place is often thought of as sheltering at home, but that's not necessarily the case. Just think about maybe you're out at the grocery store when a tornado warning is given. You're not going to get in your car and drive home to shelter there. You're going to shelter in place. And so that's seeking safety where you're already at when this event occurs. Certainly, as you have warnings about things like an approaching hurricane and that's going to be much more likely that you're either going to evacuate the entire local area or that you're going to be already at home and preparing to shelter in place there. Staying at home is, of course, making sure that you are safe as possible until the emergency passes. But when you do that, you need to make sure that you monitor those warnings that are given through the radio, through that battery or crank-powered radio that we talked about before, and making sure that you have the additional supplies if you're going to try to ride out a longer-term emergency. So before you have an evacuation for, let's say, a hurricane, you need to think through, as I said before, kind of practice or run through your mind the scenarios of what you would do. Plan on how you'll leave and where you'll go if you're told to evacuate. Oftentimes, folks from the Tidewater area will evacuate up Route 64 or Route 460 and come into the Richmond area or even beyond, but consider what would be the case if you were in the Tidewater area and the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel was closed and you couldn't get out that way. Do you have routes already thought of how you would get over to Suffolk and the James River Bridge and get out that way, or another avenue of safety? So plan on being able to go multiple directions in case something does come up, because it's an emergency. You never know what you could encounter. In the lead up to a hurricane, you always see the lines at the gas stations extended as people fill up their cars. This is appropriate, as people need to be able to drive away and evacuate, and they might be sitting in traffic a while, so you can't try to do that on a quarter tank of gas. And always, as I said, that emergency kit that you'd have in your home, make sure you grab it or have a second one for your car as you prepare to evacuate. When you are actually required to evacuate, there are some resources available to you that you can access. For instance, on your smartphones or devices, you can download the FEMA app, and it will give instructions and help you locate a local shelter. You'll have the emergency radio from your emergency kit and be able to follow instructions there if you keep it charged or with spare batteries, and be able to know what the latest guidance is on the situation. You'll want to, of course, take your emergency supply kit, and you want to listen and monitor that information so that you can get out of the area well in advance of the severe weather, so that you don't get trapped. And it's never a bad idea to let someone know where you're going. Call a family member or a friend from out of state and give them an idea of your plans, so that later on, when they're trying to figure out, are you safe or not, they'll have ways to contact you. They'll know where to look for you. Though I wouldn't suggest putting yourself in harm's way to do this, you'll want to make sure to secure your home before you leave. But if it's a matter of getting out before danger strikes, that things can be replaced, but you cannot. So don't unnecessarily take risks to just lock a garage door. And likewise, you'll want to do your best to not have things plugged in, as power surges will occur and possible overloading of circuits. Try to unplug things, but once again, don't create an unsafe situation for yourself. Always follow the recommended evacuation routes. They are clearly marked. Don't think that you know a better way. That better way in your mind, that might be clear 364 days of the year, doesn't stand up well in a flood, perhaps. And the authorities know this and will have not included that in an evacuation route. So follow the routes that are clearly marked and advised. And even then, you might still encounter an unsafe condition. As I said, a tunnel that's closed, or some small bridge has been knocked out by a stream in a flood condition. So you need to be prepared to stop and retrace your steps and find a safer route. Never drive into flooded waters. It is absolutely ridiculous the number of times that we see every year folks that drive into what they perceive to be just a little bit of water, only to find themselves being rescued by a swift water team because their car has been swept downstream. Don't drive into flooded water. After the evacuation, after it's all over and it's possible to return to your homes after the danger has passed, you need to be prepared that life will not be as it was before the event happened. There may be power disruptions or service disruptions for weeks. And so going back to the storm, back to an area after a storm may not be completely the best situation for you. Consider that and plan accordingly. And as always, communicate. Let folks know what's happening so that they can help keep track of you as you travel. Again, because power might be out, it might be perfectly safe in your neighborhood, but there may be no power. And so you want to make sure to have batteries or charged up devices before you head back home. And also, the utilities, including water, may not be available. And so take the things with you that you used to get away from the danger as you return to that area. In the case with power, there's always the danger of power outages that are caused by downed power lines. These conditions are extremely deadly and must be avoided at all costs. Don't go near a downed power line. Don't try to drive around it, over it. Just stay away from it because of the harm that can come to you and your loved ones. And speaking of power and safety, generators are great if they are properly installed and operated. Never put one inside a facility in a home or a garage, and don't try to connect it to your main circuit breaker box, because you will only invite disaster upon disaster. All right, so those are things that are appropriate for you as you return from an emergency evacuation. Here's a couple sources of information that can help you stay prepared, aware of what's going on, and be able to harness tools and the resources needed to keep yourself, your loved ones, and even your pets safe. Again, these slides will be made available to you so you can look those websites up or download those apps. All right, that was a rather rushed overview of disaster preparedness. The three basic things: build a kit, have a kit, make a plan, and stay informed are your best three tools. You'll be able to meet any kind of an incident much more safely, come through it with less harm to you or your belongings, your family, and you'll be able to tell others of how you came through it using the tools and resources that you gathered beforehand, and help them be better prepared next time. One of the ways to be prepared is practice. So, as I said earlier, go through these plans with your family. Make sure that they're aware of what to do in the event a disaster strikes, and always make sure to share your plans with others so that they can help and support you even from a distance. I believe, yes, that we are at a point where we can take some questions. I apologize for the technical details that were disruptive earlier on. Hopefully our conversation can be a little bit more informal and allow you to gain some knowledge based upon the conversation. Let me figure out how to unshare this now and go from there.
Thank you, David. We did have a couple questions come through during the presentation. One of them was, can you go over the emergency kit that you would put in your car? Are there different things that you would put in your car kit that you would in your house kit?
Good. That's a really helpful thing to consider, because yes, you may not need as many tools, let's say at home, as you would in a vehicle, because of the mechanical aspect. You might be able to do a little repair if something occurs in your automobile. But one of the things that people often encounter in a vehicle is the loss of or being trapped on a road, being they get stuck beside the road and they run out of gas and so on. And so things that will help them in those situations. The probably the most basic thing you want to have in an automobile safety kit are some flares, or at the least reflectors to put out around the vehicle so that others will be able to see and avoid an accident. Safety blankets. I presume most of you are familiar with the small, um, very compact silver emergency blankets. They're very lightweight, just a few ounces, but they unfold to a full-size blanket, and because of their design, they reflect heat so much more effectively than you'd believe. And so to have those 3 or 4 of those, enough at least for one per passenger in your vehicle, to have in an automobile safety kit would be a good idea. Also, it's probably a good idea if it's in a automobile kit, to have water stored in there, or to take extra water along, because this is one of those situations where you might be cut off from getting other resources for quite some time. Certainly, there are others that might have suggestions of what else to put in an auto kit. So by all means, share and help us learn together.
And then we got, if you're being directed to leave your home to go to a shelter, are you really expected to bring multiple gallons of water with you to the site? That's probably a no, right? Won't they have water there? And then how would you know ahead of time which places will accept a cat?
Well, is the preparations for, well, let me go back. Yeah, you wouldn't want to take water to a shelter, but again, having it, if you're driving to a shelter on your own, then you can certainly take the water and leave it in the vehicle. But a shelter that's one of the basic requirements of a shelter, to set it up, whether it's a local locality shelter or a state-run shelter, to have available potable water for everyone. Now, in terms of the pets, let's say here in Chesterfield County, we have our local law enforcement animal control staff on hand, that in case someone does show up with a pet, that they are very clearly identified who it belongs to, and credentials and so forth are shared. And then the animal control officer takes the pet and transports it to a local pet shelter or a veterinarian that has the capacity to handle some extra pets, or several within the immediate area. And so if you don't have the ability to do the pre-screening, to think, okay, where am I going to go with my pet, then at least make sure with your locality that they have the resources to take custody of a pet and to transport it to a safe environment, and then get it back to you at the end of the event.
We got a lot of good suggestions for car kit: toilet paper, walking shoes. Oh, also a really good suggestion about taking pictures of you with your pet.
Yes, that's
So you
actually
can prove that
something
that's
I
your pet.
believe here in Chesterfield. I believe Animal Control does that as part of their process. Is they take a photo of you and to keep for their records.
This is
So
all great
we should,
feedback.
capture the. I presume, Adrenia, we can capture the chat information and have that in the recording, as well as resources to share with the participants.
Pets Act requires that there are shelters that accept pets either in people shelter or co-located. Not every shelter in a locality will be a co-located shelter, though. So there might be 5 people shelters and only one that is a pet and people shelter.
There are a growing number of shelters that are being established, not co-located, but are operated by volunteers.
Mhm.
And And typically those veterinarian offices and so forth will work together with other uh, with their colleagues to ensure that there's a place close by, not necessarily co-located. And in some instances, there is one particular um, shelter I know in the more rural areas of our general greater Richmond area that does large animal, large pet shelters. So horses, goats, and so on, that they will accept custody of, but that's obviously not co-located to the human shelter.
In the parking lot. Can you bring
Right.
meds to shelters?
Yes, absolutely. That's one of the things that is practiced by our district staff, those both our MRC volunteers that were trained in shelter operations, as well as our own staff, of how to handle medication custody in case someone wants the medical staff to hold on to it. For instance, insulin oftentimes needs to be refrigerated, and so it can be taken by the medical staff and put in a refrigerator and then given to the client, the resident, as they need it throughout their stay. And oftentimes they'll be able to take their medication right to their wherever their cot or their area of the shelter is. But some medications, such as opioids, they ask that it's kept by the medical staff so that it doesn't inadvertently fall into the wrong hands. But yes, by all means, medications can be taken to shelters, as well as medical support devices like portable oxygen, CPAPs, and BiPAPs. Those kind of medical tools can also be taken to shelters.
This is great. Great questions and great feedback about what to do with your pets in the shelters.
Yeah, I
If
just
you
saw
wear
something
glasses
pop
or
up there.
contacts,
Yeah,
that's good too. Bring extras.
right. Yeah, there are so many possibilities of things that you could need. We go around and we put our glasses down, we let our phone sit there not charged, and it really does take a different kind of uh, reassessing what you do at home and what you might need in the event that isn't accessible to you for 2 days or a week or whatever. And it makes you pause and think, okay, could I get by without that? Okay, I could, but that I could not. So those extra chargers or extra pair of glasses or something along those lines that you'll want to have with you.
Would MRC volunteers be asked to come help at an emergency shelter?
Absolutely. We just, this is end of November, got to remember, late October, maybe it was early October, can't remember. We train our volunteers on shelter operations. And in Chesterfield, we do it hands-on. We actually not just give a presentation of what to expect in a shelter and who's doing what, but rather we also then give them equipment to use, such as our emergency go kits, our first aid kits, and so on. And then we present them with scenarios that they have to act out. And so we role play. One volunteer or a group of volunteers will be residents checking into a shelter, and the other group will be those responding, whether it's medical support or it's a non-medical staff member helping out. And then they go through all those scenarios and then they switch. And they have to learn how to set up and tear down a cot, or to um, go through, like we just described the situation with transferring custody of medication, or for whatever reason, if the social services staff lets somebody slip through that has a little pocket monkey or something like that, and the MRC staff discovers that, they then know how to respond and to point them the right direction. We go through scenarios, medical scenarios, that can and cannot be admitted into a shelter. And in that case, it's typically, if it's something acute, critical, even life-threatening, certainly you don't want them in the shelter. You want them to get the medical care at a hospital or a first aid station. And all that's absolutely. MRC volunteers in Chesterfield, and I presume those of you at state level, Mike and your team can say that this is the case. Our MRC volunteers are an extension of our staff. They are an adjunct. They are an augment. They are not a separate kind of a person. A nurse is a nurse, provided their license and credentials are current. A person knowledgeable in CPR is, whether they're a medical or a member of the actual paid staff or a volunteer, and those that support and greet customers and clients. It doesn't matter whether or not they are a staff member. They are treated with the same respect and appreciation that a staff member would. I think I saw, if I'm not mistaken, I'm going to call her out. Kathy Harrison, I think I saw on the call or on the meeting. And if I'm not mistaken, Kathy was present in recent trainings, at least Revive training, if not shelter training. Are you out there, Kathy? Am I correct? Well, she probably can't unmute herself. So, but we do treat our volunteers just as if they're a member of the team, because they are.
There was one other question, but I went too far. What are your recommendations for sheltering in place during an event that might isolate you from police EMT?
That's a pretty particular scenario. Sheltering in place where you might be out of contact or accessibility to fire and EMT and law enforcement. The only kind of situation I believe I could see there, well, if you were warned of, like I said, a train derailment or something like that, that would cause you to have to shelter, just stay at home, don't go out. You might not see the law enforcement or fire because they're handling situations and there's no immediate danger to you. But I can't think that you wouldn't be able to contact them via landline or cell phone or even an internet connection. I suppose something along those lines where it was a severe storm had knocked down power. You don't have a communication tool. That's the kind of scenario that you absolutely want to avoid if at all possible. And so if there was any ability to evacuate prior to the situation happening, of course, we'd recommend you do that. And in the event where you were isolated, you're going to use kind of common sense things, conserve your energy, conserve your resources, be creative in ways that you could communicate with anyone that might be, say, searching the neighborhood that would come across you. And so, like in the floods in Kentucky and in Western Virginia, we saw people in upstairs windows hanging, say, a red towel out the window, shutting the window and making sure that could be seen as kind of a flag or a banner to let people know you're there. I would not recommend, of course, starting a fire at all. I would not recommend going out of the home unless there was an absolute essential need to do so, because the danger is without as opposed to within. And probably the best thing that you would want to do is, if you still had access to, say, running water, you want to continue to store as much water as possible, because you don't know how long you're going to be there and without that potential resource. Sorry about that. All right. Any other questions?
There was Are child emergency kits different? And then there was a good response about ready.gov having checklists and child-focused educational materials.
Yeah, we really blew through the information about kits kind of quickly because the particular circumstances of individuals are so varied. Elderly, excuse me, those with disabilities, infants, expectant moms, um, those that are alone at home and have no one else. Different kinds of things constitute what would be appropriate for them. I guess in excuse me, in thinking on that, this is the area where preparation is so vital to to take time right now at the end of November. We don't, we're at the end of hurricane season, so we're not expecting severe storms of that nature for a while, and we're not yet to the times of really severe winter weather where those kind of climactic hazards confront us. So I won't say it's a downtime for emergencies, but rather less likely of the widespread type. And so this is the time to really think through, to prepare and plan and communicate in the event of the possibility something may arise, whether it's in this winter or next spring. And so preparation is crucial. And that's why you're having this training, so that the members of the Medical Reserve Corps and their families can benefit from insights. They're certainly not going to learn much from me, but through the resources we provide them, the links and the insights and so forth, they can gain a wealth of knowledge that will help them prepare, whether they're home alone or they're dealing with a single parent that has a number of children in the home, or an elderly couple that typically only goes out to go to their doctor 2 or 3 times a week. Each condition is going to be individual and unique, but it can be best met by thinking ahead and preparing.
Yeah, I think that's all excellent information. Does anybody else have any other questions?
I do see an input from Kathy, so she's clearly out there about cash. I failed to say that. Yeah, you may encounter situations where your debit cards, your credit cards are not going to work, and so having some cash on hand to cover some expenses, and it's probably not common that we carry around $50 and $100 bills typically, and that's a good thing because you want to keep smaller bills on hand. You may not be able to get change, and the item needs to be purchased, and so make sure to carry ones, fives, tens, 20s, and have some of that set aside. And there's an entirely separate training called financial disaster preparedness, and it's not avoiding the housing market crash, but rather what to do in the event of an emergency financially and how to prepare for that. So perhaps down the road that can be an item for future trainings.
We did get one last question. Besides the emergency weather station, is there a statewide emergency station that will stay on when electricity is out?
A statewide emergency station. I'm going to unfortunately claim ignorance on that. I don't know of one. The National Weather Service, NOAA, is the best source for, of course, the weather-related incidents. And Virginia 511 does a great service in keeping us informed about road conditions and closures and hazards that way. And Mike, can you answer whether or not the 211 service is available for that kind of assistance? Apparently not. So no, I do not know of a statewide public accessible. We have radios and features that we use as a government to stay connected, but I don't think there is such a thing to the general public.
Joyce says has good info in there in the chat.
Okay, on the if you have the television, the emergency broadcast system, that is there, but that is of course dependent upon your ability to access that.
Any other questions? Ooh.
That last question there, that is a case by case basis. I don't know of a law that protects anyone in the event of an emergency, but I can't recall an incident where someone who was in an emergency condition that had to shelter or take evacuation, that they were in any way negatively um, affected by an employer. Generally, the employer is in the same condition as the individual having to evacuate or whatever.